guys have to just excuse me, I'm a little under the weather. Moria Begoria, a 20-year-old worker in Bangladesh. She makes 20 to 24 cents an hour in poverty wages. She works for a factory that produces goods for American retail companies, working over 100 plus hours a week, working in wretched conditions. Maureen was also expecting, but she lost her baby after 7 months working in this condition. By raise of hands, how many of you guys shop at H&M? How about The Gap, Victoria's Secret, Walmart, Sears? So these are just a few of the companies that I've named that have used sweatshops to produce their goods, and they pay workers poverty wages for producing these goods. Now my topic today is consumerism in the United States, sweatshops, which are known as production labor camps in international countries, child labor, and what we can do to help offset these causes. Now I'm credible to speak on this topic because I've done extensive research, and I also have personal experience hearing stories from people that have worked in sweatshops, both overseas and in the US. Now sweatshops, which is also known as a sweat factory, is defined as a workplace with socially unacceptable conditions for workers. So China, Bangladesh, India, and Mexico are the largest, have the largest sweatshops, and actually their economies thrive on the production of goods that get sold to American retail companies, as I said before. According to War on Want, the Bangladesh garment companies produce 80% of this country's export revenue, meaning that in that country, 80% of what comes out of that country comes from sweatshop laborers. The repercussions of sweatshops are that people work between 14 to 16-hour shifts. They get relatively no sleep. They work in unsafe and hazardous conditions. People have lost limbs. People have lost their lives. People have gotten cancer. People have gotten tumors. But because of the conditions that they live in their country, they're forced to continue to work in these conditions. And then also, fires are prone to happening, as well as building collapses, which means that they're working in the sweatshops, but because the conditions of the buildings that they work in often fall in on them, and that's where deaths come from, as well as fires that are started. So people are losing their lives over the production of these goods. The majority of sweatshop workers are women and children. So that's why you heard the story about Moria. They often give their sweatshop workers birth control. They force them to abort any type of babies that they have, with risk of losing production of these sweatshop workers. And children are also a very, very, very big part in sweatshop labor as well. So if you think of going over to India where wages are low, most often children are made to stop going to school and work to support their family. Now for this, many of them do go into the sweatshop to actually make the poverty wages that they do. Now, if you think back to your first job, because I'm assuming most of us work, and we wanted a little bit of extra money just to put in our pockets to buy the newest shoes, or, you know, to help support our family, we couldn't start work until we were 15, maybe 14 under the table, but we had to have working papers. Now some of these children that are working in the sweatshops are actually like 8 to 9 years old. Many of them start when they're actually 5 years old because their families are so impoverished, and they actually do need that financial support. Now, the U.S. child labor laws were actually started in...
You're doing a great job. Is that really somebody knocking around?
Is this on? That's this on here?
Oh. Sorry, guys. That's okay. We're recording a speech. I'm really sorry, Angelica. She used to go to the doctor, and this is her 102 paper. And she was supposed to come to the class after.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah, right, 11:30. Okay.
I haven't figured out stop.
You said something about us getting shoes, extra money for buying shoes that we
When you
want.
got your first job.
When you got your
Okay,
first job.
okay, thanks guys.
Got it.
You guys are good.
All right, so when we got our first job, we had to start 15, probably 14 with working papers. Okay, so in the U.S., there are child labor laws that actually started in 1924 that prevented children from working in hazardous conditions, and that actually started during the textile industry in the U.S. when factories were booming, the World War was happening, and there was a lot of production that happened in the U.S. Now, if you think about labor laws in this country, they actually don't exist in international countries, which is another reason why the means for the children to support their families so heavily, because they need to work because the countries are in development. Many of the children, like I said, are female, but a lot of them are male, but many of them are abducted, they're forced, they're beaten, they're confined, abused, sometimes even raped to work in these conditions. Because the need for sweatshop labor is so important, because the U.S. and many other countries like Europe also demand it to continue our industry. Dana Thomas, a cultural correspondent for Newsweek, said in an NPR interview that if it's made in the U.S. today, then it's probably okay. Now, Dana Thomas, she's a great person to speak on this topic, but I actually want to rebuke what she said. In terms of if it's made in the U.S., it's probably okay. Because according to my research, there are still sweatshops internationally, but there are many that we don't know about that are actually in the U.S. And even though we do have strong labor laws against the amount of hours that children can work, there are still children working in sweatshops that reside in the U.S. And many of U.S. companies, retail shops, are known and derive their consumerism from the factories that are actually in the U.S. So we are actually producing sweatshop factories, and the merchandise that we produce actually does go to these companies that extort sweatshops. So basically, I want to talk about what we can do as consumers in the U.S. to possibly minimize this impact of sweatshops and of sweatshop labors. So what I found to do was to minimize spending at certain stores. Now I know we love H&M and the Gap, and it's so crazy because when I was doing this topic, I actually work in Victoria's Secret, and the things that I didn't realize about the company that I worked with were astonishing, and it's really something that kind of startled me and took me back. But what I wanted to say is to minimize your spending at these certain stores. So think about how cheap and affordable some of the clothes that we buy and the goods that we buy. And just think of how even cheaper they are made in production, internationally and nationally, and that reflects on the wages and also the conditions that these people are living in and that they also work in. And the second point that I want to make is do your research. So I know that there are a lot of companies that don't produce goods from sweatshops or don't use child labor to produce goods. So I just say do your research in terms of which stores may have these regulations and also which may not, because sweatshop street clothing isn't guaranteed just because it doesn't say made in China. Because this is this whole debate where even though it may say made in China, it could be made like a certain piece of the good could be made in China, but another piece could be made in Italy, so it's not guaranteed that the good is made in one particular country. My third main point is to use Black Friday, Cyber Monday, department stores, things like that, as your opportunity to buy quality but yet affordable goods, so that we're minimizing our use of these stores and these companies that do extort the labor. And in conclusion, Dana Thomas again said one of the problems that has risen from our nonstop consumerism is that we want to save money, buy more, and business owners want to make bigger profits. So I say that keep in mind that this is a profit base, but we can be individuals and think of the lives that we affect and what our dollars go towards and what we're actually supporting when we spend our money at these different companies. And just be aware and cognizant of the actions, especially when we're spending our hard-earned money.